I'm going to show you how you can create a simple design, something like this, using Illustrator, where you're combining an image and some text to create this sort of positive and negative space style design. So I'm going to start off by showing you how to open a new page in Illustrator. So we'll go back to the Start menu. So when you open Illustrator for the first time, you'll get a window a little bit like this. And we want to create a brand new document. So if we go to Create New over here, and you should get some templates here. I generally like to work with an A3 page, but generally in Illustrator it doesn't matter too much because it's a vector program, so you don't have to worry too much about quality of image. But if you go to print at the top, this is what I usually do. You can choose A4. A4 would be fine, but if you want more, if you go to more presets, and you can choose A3 if you want to. It really actually, when you're working with vector, it really doesn't matter how big your page is. I'm just going to stick with A4 because it'll give me a smaller file. Then over here, you can give your document a title if you want. I usually do this when I save it, but if you want to give it a name now, you can do. You can put in your measurements if you want a specific size page, but I just usually go for, because I've picked A4, I'll leave that, and I'll decide whether I want it to be landscape or portrait. And I think I'll go with portrait at the moment for the design that I'm going to show you. I don't usually play around with anything else. I usually leave everything else as it is and then just go to create, and it'll give you a new page in Illustrator. All right. So the design I've already created, if I go back to this one here, so I've created this design here, and it's based on an image that I've drawn in Photoshop. So the first thing you need to do is to transport over a photograph or an image or a drawing that you've done. This could be a Photoshop drawing. This could be a drawing that you've drawn by hand and you scan it in. It really doesn't matter too much, but you do, for the sake of this design, you want it to be a drawing that's fairly straightforward and simple, like this one here. So if I open up Photoshop, this is the drawing that I've created. Now I want to get this drawing into Illustrator. Now normally you might want to export it and whatever, but for what we're doing, because I'm going to vectorize this image, just a simple copy and paste will do just fine. So I'm just going to use like a capture. But you can use the snipping tool if you're on Windows, whatever, it's up to you. So I'm just going to create a copy like that of my page. Then I'm just going to go to Illustrator, and I'm just going to go to my new document that I created, and I'm just going to pull it out. So let me just minimize that for a moment. So there's the image I just copied, and there we go. So it's just a simple JPEG image of my drawing. So we are going to vectorize this. I'll show you how to do that now. It's very, very easy. So if we go up to Window at the top, and we want to image trace it, and what that will do is it will create a vector drawing of the image that you import. So when you go to Window, these are all the actions that you can do, and they're in alphabetical order. So image trace is about halfway down, and it will give you this option here. So just make sure your design is selected. If it's blacked out like mine was, I just double clicked on it just to sort of, just to activate my image area. Let me just make that a little bit smaller. It loses proportion, so hold shift to make sure you keep your proportion so you don't end up with a stretched image. So I want it black and white. When you open yours, it'd probably be a bit like that. So I usually open up the advanced. I'm going to click on ignore white, because what that will do is it will make all my white see-through, and I'm going to keep it on black and white. But if you did want a color, you could choose a color mode, grayscale or black and white. You could choose various different settings here. The best thing to do is to just have a play around. So each one of these you choose will give you a different outcome, but because my picture's already black and white, it's not going to do a lot. But if you had a colored picture, you can experiment and play around with these different settings to see what effects you get. So when I click on preview, what Illustrator will do is vectorize it. So what that means is it will draw it. It will almost trace it for you. That's why it's called image trace, because it will trace the drawing and turn it into a vector image, which will make your image really sharp. There'll be no pixels. I could zoom in loads and it will never ever get pixelated. I will always have really sharp lines. So vector, it's quite nice to work with sometimes. So that's the image trace, and it's pretty straightforward. You can play around with a lot of these different sliders here. If you're working with a color image, I would suggest have a play around, and it'll give you different results as you go. So every time I move one of these, it will change my image, but that's exactly what I want, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just get rid of that now because I don't need that anymore. But the image trace is if you go to Window and then Image Trace, alphabetical order, so it's about there, and that's how you access that. I'm going to do one more step because at the moment I've got this box over my image and it's not actually outlined yet, and I want it outlined. So if I go to Object and then go to Expand, make sure those are both checked and then press OK. And now I've got what basically is an Illustrator drawing of my image, okay, of my piece of work. Okay, so now it's vectorized. So that's my image done. I'm just going to come over to my layers. At the moment you've got one layer that I'm working on, but what I would recommend is, I'm just going to close that for a moment, is create a new layer to work on. So I'm just going to create a new layer. So keep everything on separate layers, just makes life a bit easier. And when you work in Photoshop, everything automatically goes on a new layer. In Illustrator, it doesn't automatically do that. You get these sub layers. And if you don't think about your layers too much, what you'll have is all of your work will be inside of one layer, and it can get confusing later on. So try to remember to try and keep things on separate layers. It just makes life easier if you want to edit things. If I want to hide that now to do something else, I can easily do that if it's on a separate layer. So I'm going to work on layer 2 now to add some text. Now, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a quote from this story. So for your work, you can use a quote from the story, you can use the name of the story, you can use the name of the characters. It's sort of up to you what you do. But on this other one here, I use this quote here. So I'm going to start with that. So the text tool is over here in your toolbars. So first thing I need you to do, because I've just clicked and held on my T, and I've got a range of settings here that you may want to experiment with. Just one little thing, because you may notice that when you click on yours, you might only have like 3 things there. So if that's the case, go up to Window, go down to Toolbars, and make sure you've got Advanced checked, not Basic, because Basic gives you a lot less over here. So if you're wondering why things are missing at any point, just go to Window, Toolbar, and then make sure you've got Advanced checked. So I'm going to click on the text tool. What I'm going to do is if I look at this one, I've got my words laid out like this. So it's not in straight lines, okay? So what I would recommend you do is not create a text box like that. That's great if you want to create lots of text, like a paragraph like that, which I don't want to do that. I would click and just click, and then I'd write out my words. So my first word is for. I'm not going to write a whole sentence, I'm just going to keep them separate. So then I'll go back to my text tool, and then the next word, and I would build it up like that. Double click. Actually, I don't want a capital C there, and probably not a capital W there. All right, so then I'll just type out my whole quote like that. Okay, I'm not going to do the whole thing right now because I'm just going to show you some, basically what to do. Just moving these out the way. I'm going to start with the 4. So I'm just going to click on them. Just make it a bit bigger. Again, to avoid, stretching, just hold hold Shift as you enlarge, and that will keep your proportion. So I'm going to start with 4 at the moment. Hold Shift, and I'm going to enlarge it. First thing you might want to do is choose a font. Okay, so to choose a font, come over to the right hand side where it says Properties, and whatever tool you're selected on over here, you'll get a range of properties. So I've got some text selected, so it's giving me some text properties like paragraphs. We don't need that. Characters tab is what we're going to use. You've got your color. I'm not going to worry about color right now. I'll do the color afterwards, and I could even color in this as well because it's been vectorized. So if I clicked on here and then chose a color, I could easily change the color quite easily, but I'll talk about color in a second. So I'm going to click back on my text again. So I've got my characters tab, and you want to choose a font. Now there are lots of fonts that you can use in Illustrator, and you can even, if you go to find more, you can download loads of fonts as well from the internet. So what I want for this to look best is a nice thick bold font. So if you go up to the top where it says filters and click on there, I've already got filtered heavyweight fonts. So if I wanted something fine, it would just give me fine fonts. If I wanted like condensed fonts, it would give me them. So I could click on any of these and it would give me those settings. Or I could just click off it to get rid of it, just click back on it to get rid of it. So I want a nice chunky heavyweight font, and you can decide if you want a sans serif. If you're not sure what they are, if you hover over it, it gives you their names if you want a serif font. So depending on what sort of style you want, it will give you what options it has. So I want just a simple font, or maybe, yeah, let's go with a simple font. You want to spend a bit of time choosing one. You might want to download some. I actually haven't downloaded much on here, so I haven't got that many exciting ones, but it's very easy. DaFont, for example, is really good font website to if you want to download fonts. So that's DAFONT. That one's quite a good one to use, which I've downloaded loads of stuff from there in the past. I'm just going to go with that one for now. But again, you know, make sure you're happy with your font before you move on to the next stage that I'm going to show you. So firstly, you want to arrange your text. Now, you might decide that you don't want all your text in a straight line. So if you want to change sort of how the letters sort of sit next to each other and the spacing between the letters and how they sit and arrange, if you click and hold your T and go down to the touch type tool, what you can do is you can click on an individual letter and you can enlarge that letter on its own. You can rotate it if you want to. You can squash it that way. You can pull it down over here. Oops, which one is it? That enlarges the whole thing. Oh, it's this one here. That one stretches it out. Not that, you know, I would personally do that, but they are there for you. So main ones I would use is either the size that way, or I'd reposition it. And then you can do the same on each one. So you can click on one and you can arrange it. You can have them overlapping. So you can play around with the way that they're laid out quite easily. You can also click on one of them and change the font, so you've got a different font for different letters. But be careful if you're using more than one font. Try to sort of balance that by using the same fonts, you know, throughout your whole quote. If you use like about 10 fonts throughout your work, it's not going to look very nice. Okay. If I go back to the black arrow at the top, then I can click on my word and I can move the whole thing around. So once I've done that to my whole quote, obviously I would spend some time choosing, you know, I wouldn't go crazy with lots of different fonts. I'd try and keep it fairly simple because it would just look a lot better. I'd probably think about, if I go back to my other design, this one here, less important words I've got smaller, and more important words I've got larger. In this one, when I talked about different fonts, for the most part, I've started off with this normal sort of standard sans serif font, and then I've just used 2 other fonts just for the word love and beast, but everything else is simple. So if you are using multiple fonts, think about fonts that will sit nicely together and don't sort of overdo it with too many fonts. Okay, so once you've laid out your overall design, I'll just leave it at that for now because you get the general idea. The next thing we need to do is vectorize the lettering. So change it from being text to shapes of text or drawings of text. So before you do this, you need to make sure you're happy with your font, okay? Because once we do the next stage, you can't change your font. So I'm going to click on both of them. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to create outlines. If for whatever reason create outlines isn't there, like sometimes it might not be, if you go up to type at the top and then go to create outlines, there it is, or it's shift control O. So I'm going to click on there, and what I've got now is an outline of my lettering. So my lettering has a path around the outside and it's now a shape as if it's been drawn. You might also, if I click on it, the whole word select, so you might want to right click and ungroup it, or control G, I think it is, command or control G to group or ungroup. And that way, if you want to, you can click on individual letters and you can move them freely if you want to. Okay. So once you've got your layout and you think, I think I'm happy with that, I'm going to select the whole lot. Yeah, let's get the cut as well, might as well. So select the whole lot. And now we're going to use a tool called the Pathfinder. And what that will do is it will cut away parts of the image that overlap. I'll show you what I mean. I'm not sure if that's going to look good here because there's a lot of detail here, but let's try it anyway. We can always undo it. So Pathfinder is a tool that can find it over here, but if it for whatever reason it doesn't pop up over here, if you go to Window again and then go down to Pathfinder. It's in alphabetical order, so it should be near the bottom. And these are the Pathfinder options. So feel free to have a little play around with some of these, but the one I'm going to use is this one here, which is exclude. Make sure you've got the background image as well as your text all selected for this to work. So when I click on there, what it's done is wherever there's an overlap, it's cut it out. So we've got like a black and white kind of effect. And as you can see, I said it was a bit busy around here, so I'm not sure if this who works. It's probably a little bit busy. It looks okay, but it's a bit busy, bit too many things going on, which can make it a bit confusing to read. So I've looked at that. I can decide whether or not I like it. If not, Control Z to undo it. And then I can just rearrange things a little bit. So let's move that who down to there. Let's see how that works. I don't know. The idea is just have a bit of a play around, then select the whole lot again. Make sure you get it. It won't work with the CUD because the CUD I haven't vectorized it yet. It's still text, so it's not going to work. It will only work on text that you've created outlines for. So the CUD is not going to do it for that. It's just going to ignore that. But anyway, so we select that and then let's try it again. Right, that looks a little bit better. Quite like this bit up here, that looks quite good. The who looks a lot better. So now what I would do is I wouldn't do one word at a time. So now I could sit here and I could play with the could now. I would undo it, Control Z again, and then I would do my whole quote before I did the Pathfinder, because once you've used the Pathfinder, you can't go back. Okay, so if I'll just briefly edit this CUD. Let's make a nice fat font. That one, yep, that's the same one. Right click, create outlines. I'm just going to leave it a bit like that. For design purposes, I'd probably want to make it smaller just to balance it a little bit, because if you have your words getting slightly bigger and bigger and bigger as you go down, it might not look that nice. So that's that. If I select it all now and then do the Pathfinder again, what you've got is the whole thing is one image. I could right click and I could ungroup it, but then what I can do is I can only move bits and it's cut away part of that, and if I click on there, it only moves part of that O. So just Control Z to undo that. So once you have used the Pathfinder, you can't really edit it. You can't really sort of, if I want to move the who, I can't move it. It won't let me move it. So do the Pathfinder, look at it, decide if you like it or not, then Control Z to undo it. So everything's back to a editable state, so I can move it around before I move on. So that's basically the technique that you can use. Let me just select that again and Pathfinder it again. So once you get to the stage where you finish your whole quote, you've Pathfindered it, if that's even a word, Pathfindered, you're happy with everything, but you want to change the colours a little bit. So if I look at this one here, I have added bits of orange in there, and I think the reason I added that in was just to really make it pop out. So to do that, it's very easy. There's a number of things you can do, but probably the easiest thing to do would be to I'll tell you what the easiest thing to do. There's a number of ways you could do it. I want to show you the easiest. So the first thing I would do is ungroup the whole thing like that. Okay, so now I can select each individual section and I can decide what colours I want each individual section. So I might say, right, I don't want his cloak black. I want it yellow, although that will look bad, but just to show you, I'm going to put that back to black. I could take this part of the H here and I could then make that green. I choose a color scheme, obviously, something that relates to the character perhaps rather than random colors. So think about what color scheme would relate to the beast character and use something like that. So this is solid colors. You can select a whole bunch, so I can hold shift and I can select a whole bunch of sections if I wanted to arrange like the whole of the 4 in a certain color, just making sure I'm grabbing everything there. And then I can choose, I don't think I've grabbed the whole thing, but just to see, yeah. So you can have a bit of a play around with that as well. And let's grab that now, go back to that blue. If you want a gradient on it so that it's not a solid color, what you can do is if you click on whatever letter you want or whatever section you want to add a gradient to, come over to the veil. There's a number of ways you can do it, but a nice easy way. Click on the gradient there. And this brings up the gradient options. And then if I double click over here, There it is. It brings up my color options and I can choose my color. So at the moment, this is what's on there. I might not want it to be that color. Maybe I want blues like I've got up there. So I'm just going to click and pull off all those colors. I'm just going to double click on here and I can choose whatever color that I want to change it to quite easily there. And then I can do the same on this side as well. So just double click and maybe I'll choose a really dark blue. So I get something like that. And then I can, let me zoom in, so Control Plus to zoom in so I can see what I'm doing a bit better. And I can edit this by just moving the sliders. I can move this bit as well, this little diamond. It just sort of changes the transition of the gradient. I can change this bit here where the start point is. I can change it from, at the moment I've got a linear gradient, so I can change it to a radial gradient there by clicking on that one. And again, I can do the same thing there with those. I can move this around. I can change this as well. So you can play around with different ways of adding that gradient if you want a gradient. I'm just going to zoom out, which is Control minus. So have a bit of a play around with that technique as much as possible. There's quite a lot of information there I've given you. Some of you I know have got a lot of experience using Illustrator. Some of you may not. If you're struggling at any point, if anything you think is difficult or I'm not quite sure because you've not done it before, I have saved in Teams in your area this booklet here. So those of you I taught last year will be familiar with this booklet, but it's quite good. It goes through lots and lots of techniques. So if you want to have a go at following through some of these techniques in this booklet, so it explains how to open a page, it explains what some of these tools do, because I only really talked about the text tool. So if you want a bit more information, you can use this to help you. This page talks about the properties panel and what that's about. And then it just goes through a range of techniques. So the touch type tool that I briefly showed you, it explains it there. It talks about how to add patterns. If you want to add a pattern fill, it's really easy. Adding gradients and so on. And there's loads and loads of stuff. So if you want a bit more information or if you want to experiment or play a bit more, I have saved this in the Teams folder for you. Okay, so have a go at that and have a play around and just have a bit of experiment and see how that goes. All right.